We are looking at an expedition that set out for paradise, but ended up in a green labyrinth with no way out. It was not just a quest for gold, but an attempt to build a new civilization at the edge of the world.
A new beginning, a civilization built on faith and gold.
Where maps ended and complete uncertainty began. Spanish galleons, laden with dreams and ambitions, sailed into the emptiness of the Pacific Ocean, led by a man who had been waiting for this moment for 20 years.
Eso es, vamos. Por la gloria.
Instead of cities of gold, they found only endless jungles, disease and betrayal by their own comrades.
Estamos completamente perdidos.
No es mi culpa. El capitán nos dio este mapa.
The story of Álvaro de Mendaña is a chronicle of how iron discipline crumbles under the weight of tropical heat and human vices. Here, in the middle of endless water, titles and ranks lost all meaning, giving way to the animal desire to survive at any cost. Watch the video to the end to find out how one navigational error cost hundreds of lives.
This cannot be right. We are days off course.
And why the Solomon Islands disappeared from maps for 200 years. What if I told you that the most disastrous expedition of the century began with decades of bureaucratic red tape? Álvaro de Mendaña de Nera was a man who had once seen these islands and devoted the rest of his life to the idea of returning there. Back in 1568, he discovered an archipelago, which he named the Solomon Islands, believing that it was from there that the biblical King Solomon brought his gold. This idea became his obsession, his personal curse, which gave him no peace day or night. He knocked on the doors of royal palaces and viceroys' offices, demanding permission to colonize and funds to assemble a new fleet. Each year of waiting only strengthened his fanatical conviction that he was chosen for this great mission. Mendaña gathered around him people who believed not so much in geography as in the myth of easy money and glory. He promised them lands, titles, and riches that he himself had never seen, but in which he believed unconditionally. Preparations for the voyage turned into a grand undertaking, drawing resources and people from all corners of the Spanish colonies in Peru. It was a logistical challenge that required enormous supplies of provisions, water, and equipment to build a new city. In 1595, almost 30 years after the first discovery, he finally got the go-ahead and 4 ships left the port of Callao. On board were not only soldiers and sailors, but also women, craftsmen, and future colonists. It was not just a military reconnaissance mission, but a floating city ready to take root in a new place. People sold their property on the mainland to buy a place on these ships, hoping for a new life. None of them suspected that most of the tickets for this journey were one way. From the very first days, the atmosphere on the ships was filled not only with hope, but also with hidden tension between the different groups of participants. Command was difficult. Alongside Mendaña were his wife, Isabel Barreto, and the chief pilot, Pedro Fernández de Quirós. Quirós was the voice of reason and professionalism, while Mendaña increasingly immersed himself in his illusions. The conflict between dream and reality, between navigation and politics, began to smolder even before the shores of South America disappeared over the horizon. The ocean greeted them with its usual indifference, hiding the coming storms and calms beneath its smooth surface. The first weeks of the voyage passed in relative calm, but the confined space of the ships began to weigh on people's minds. The water in the barrels began to spoil, and the food became monotonous, causing the first murmurs of discontent among the passengers. Mendaña, however, was deaf to complaints, his gaze fixed only on the horizon ahead. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What do you think about people who are willing to risk the lives of hundreds of others for the sake of their obsession? Write about it in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this dramatic story.
Land! We have found land, and...
Are you ready to learn the truth about how the greatest discovery can become the greatest disappointment? After weeks of exhausting sailing, the lookout finally shouted the cherished word land.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love
for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that. Spitting slow, spitting fast, I could roast, I could gas. Think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past. And the pettiness, a reflection of the emptiness. Hilarious, you think you're worth my time, you're delirious. Mysterious, because you hide behind a fake exterior. Inferior, you know I'll always be a bit superior. Get off of me, this ain't no humble brag. I want you to hear words, you can say them back. I want you to feel free from the chains at last, and to believe in what you got, it was built to last, yeah.
Now that I've been put through hell, I never got anyone's help. I had to do it all myself. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Gonna learn the consequence of being incompetent. Mental health is confidence, dreams and some modestness. I'm not here to save the day, that's for you to take away. I could play a million mind games, but instead I say something not illogical, something that is topical. Rub it on and watch it go, make yourself unstoppable. Dreams are irresponsible, but they're always possible. If you just believe, you could be so remarkable.
Thoughts in my head, a collage and they spread. I'll be great one day, going off of my meds. No, I'm not giving up, no, I'm not giving in. I will make it to the top, taking off in the wind. I gotta make it, I'm saving every day to taste it. I'm patient, but my mind, it can hardly take it. I'm chasing a dream that I've had for several ages. A vacant, modern kingdom for the taking. Now that I've been put through hell, I never got anyone's help. I had to do it all myself. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
From the sea, it looked majestic, but on shore, the travelers were greeted by suffocating humidity and heavy, stifling air.
Jungle doesn't take us, the fever will.
Landing on the shore did not bring the relief that the exhausted people had hoped for. Instead of open spaces for building a city, they were confronted with a green wall of jungle. The soil was wet and swampy, and insects tormented them day and night. It was a place that resisted human presence, a place where nature was hostile and aggressive. Mendaña, trying to save face and keep people's spirits up, announced the founding of the colony. But the enthusiasm evaporated almost instantly when people began to build their first shelters. The wood rotted, the tools rusted, and the clothes were soaked with sweat and did not dry for weeks. The feeling of isolation on this piece of land in the middle of the ocean drove people crazy. Relations with the local population on Santa Cruz did not go well at first, repeating the scenario of the Marquesas Islands. The local chief, who was initially friendly, soon turned away from the newcomers because of their arrogance and demands. The Spaniards demanded food, which the locals did not have in abundance, and did not want to work the land themselves. Conflict was inevitable, and it finally cut off the colonists from sources of fresh provisions. An atmosphere of suspicion and informantism began to flourish in the camp. Soldiers accused officers of incompetence, and colonists regretted leaving their homes in Peru. Theft of supplies, fights, and secret meetings to discuss plans to capture ships began. Mendaña lost control of the situation, withdrawing into himself and trusting only a small circle of people. The most formidable enemy, however, was not the local inhabitants or internal strife, but the climate. Tropical rains turned the camp into a swamp, where it was impossible to keep warm or find a dry place. People slept in the mud, their belongings became covered in mold, and morale fell below zero. The illusion of civilization that they had tried to bring with them crumbled to dust. Quiros did everything he could to maintain order and ensure the safety of the ships moored in the bay. He understood that the ships were their only chance of salvation, their only link to the world. But even the ships began to suffer from the local climate. The ropes rotted and the wood was eaten away by sea worms. The fleet was dying as slowly and painfully as the colony itself. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about how quickly civilized people lose their humanity in extreme conditions? Write about it in the comments. Don't forget to like this analysis if you enjoyed it. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of the dangers of the tropics? The main killer of the expedition was not the spears of the natives or hunger, but enemies invisible to the eye: tropical diseases. The humid, heavy air of Santa Cruz was the perfect environment for the spread of malaria and other fevers. People began to weaken suddenly. A soldier who was healthy yesterday could not get up from his mat today. The disease did not discriminate between ranks and classes, striking ordinary sailors and noble hidalgos alike. The camp turned into a huge open-air infirmary where the moans of the sick mingled with the sound of rain. There were virtually no medicines, and the treatment methods of the time, such as bloodletting, only exacerbated the situation. People burned up from the heat in a matter of days, leaving their comrades in horror and bewilderment. Adelantado Álvaro de Mendaña himself, the initiator and soul of the entire enterprise, did not escape this fate either. His body, exhausted by years of struggle and stress, was unable to resist the infection. The sight of their dying commander completely demoralized the few people who remained loyal to him. The man who had promised them wealth and prosperity now needed help just to take a sip of water. Pedro de Quiros, the chief pilot, effectively took control of the sinking expedition ship. He organized the care of the sick, trying to create at least some sanitary conditions in the chaos. Quiros ordered the most seriously ill to be moved to the ships, hoping that the sea air would be more beneficial than the swamp vapors. But the ships themselves were breeding grounds for dampness and stuffiness. The lack of clean, fresh water exacerbated the situation, as the sources on the island were of dubious quality. People drank from streams into which dirt from the camp flowed, leading to outbreaks of dysentery. The cycle of disease was complete, and it seemed impossible to break out of it. Physical weakness led to apathy and complete indifference to the fate of the colony. During those days, the true strength of spirit of some participants became apparent, as they cared for their fallen comrades despite the risk. The priests who were with the expedition did not have time to read prayers over the dying. Faith was the last consolation for those who understood that they would never see their native shores again. Death became commonplace, part of the daily routine. Mendaña's death was a turning point, a point of no return for the entire mission. The leader left without appointing a clear military successor, but leaving power to his wife. This created a power vacuum at the most critical moment, when tough and quick decisions were needed. The colony was left leaderless in the face of the advancing jungle and disease. In the next chapter, you will learn who took the helm of the expedition after Mendaña's death, and how this decision nearly led to a mutiny. Do you think a change of leadership in a crisis can save the situation?
We need a leader, or we are lost.
After Mendaña's death, something unprecedented for the Spanish fleet of that time happened. Command of the expedition passed not to an experienced officer or pilot, but to the admiral's widow, Doña Isabel Barredo. She declared herself governor of the colony, relying on her husband's will and the support of her relatives. A woman at the head of the conquistadors' armada was a challenge to all the traditions and norms of the 16th century. Isabel was a tough, authoritative woman, devoid of sentimentality. She immediately made it clear that she would not tolerate any disobedience and would rule with an iron fist. While Cyrus was busy with navigation and ships, Isabella took control of the distribution of supplies and discipline. Her tent became the center of power, where battle-hardened soldiers came for orders. Her decision to take power caused a storm of indignation among some of the officers and sailors. Many considered it humiliating to obey a woman, especially in such a critical situation. Whispers that she had usurped power grew into open discontent, but Isabel nipped any attempts at rebellion in the bud. She had her own personal guard, loyal only to her. One of her first decisions was to reduce rations for everyone except her entourage. She understood that supplies were dwindling and decided to save them for those who were useful to her. This caused hatred among the ordinary sailors and soldiers who were dying of hunger and disease. The contrast between her luxurious lifestyle, she even brought expensive dresses and bedding with her, and the poverty of the camp was striking. Isabel insisted on leaving the cursed island of Santa Cruz and trying to reach Manila. It was a risky decision, as the ships were in terrible condition and the crew was barely able to stand. But staying meant certain death, and Quiros supported her in this. Preparations for departure took place in an atmosphere of chaos and haste. She personally supervised the loading of her belongings, while the wounded and sick were loaded as ballast. Her coldness and calculation frightened even the most seasoned veterans. It seemed that human lives were just numbers in a report to her. But it was precisely this cruelty that was perhaps the only way to keep the crumbling expedition moving. Isabel Barreto went down in history as the first and perhaps only female admiral of the Age of Discovery. Her reign was controversial and cruel, but effective in terms of retaining power. Did she save the remnants of the expedition or condemn them to further suffering? This question will remain unanswered forever. Are you ready for the shocking truth about what happens on a ship when the water runs out? The journey from Santa Cruz to Manila turned into a veritable hell on water, stretching on for endless weeks. The ships, ravaged by worms and storms, barely stayed afloat, requiring constant pumping of water from the holds. People weakened by disease had to work at the pumps around the clock to keep from sinking. Quiros charted the course, relying on his skill and prayers, as the maps of the area were blank. The main problem was a catastrophic shortage of fresh water and provisions. The water in the barrels had gone bad, turning into a foul-smelling sludge that was impossible to drink without disgust. The food consisted of moldy crackers infested with worms and beetles. Every day, the bodies of the dead were thrown overboard. Death became so commonplace that funeral services were no longer held for the deceased. They were simply thrown into the ocean. Sharks followed the ships like an ominous escort, waiting for their next prey. The smell of decay and disease permeated the wood of the ships, becoming unbearable. Isabel Barreto continued to hoard supplies for herself and her entourage, driving the crew mad. People stared at the locked storerooms with hungry eyes, ready to kill for a piece of bread. Quiros struggled to keep the mutiny at bay, convincing people that only discipline would help them reach land. His authority was the only thing keeping order. At one point, the ships lost sight of each other during a night storm. The flagship was left alone in the middle of the ocean, unaware of the fate of the other ships. This loneliness intensified the feeling of hopelessness. It seemed that the whole world had forgotten about them, and they were doomed to drift forever. The galleon's technical condition was critical. The sails were in tatters, the yards creaked, and the hull was leaking everywhere. Carpenters tried to patch the holes with whatever they had at hand, using leaden boards from the internal bulkheads. It was a struggle for buoyancy, in which man competed with the destructive force of nature. In the next chapter, we will tell you what the inhabitants of Manila saw when this ghost ship entered the harbor. Do you think such sacrifices were worth it for survival?
We've gone too far.
The arrival in Manila in February 1596 came as a shock to the local residents and authorities. A ship entered the harbor that looked more like a floating coffin than a proud vessel of the Spanish crown. The sails hung in tatters, the hull was overgrown with algae and shells, and the deck was silent. No one fired cannons in salute, no one shouted greetings. When the port authorities boarded the ship, they were met with a scene of utter despair. The living resembled skeletons covered in skin, with wild eyes and sores on their bodies. Many were unable to stand and lay directly on the deck among the rubbish and tackle. The smell coming from the holds made even the most hardened sailors cover their noses with handkerchiefs. Isabel Barreto came out to greet the guests in her best dress, trying to preserve what remained of her dignity and grandeur. The contrast between her attire and the condition of the crew was frightening and grotesque. She still demanded to be treated as governor and admiral, even though there was almost no one left to rule. The people of Manila, accustomed to the sight of ships after long voyages, had never seen anything like this. They organized help, bringing fresh water, fruit, and meat on board. For the survivors, the taste of fresh food was like a miracle, and many cried, unable to believe that the nightmare was over. Quiros, exhausted but not broken, submitted a report on the voyage to the authorities. The whole city listened to his story about what they had gone through, about the Marquesas Islands, about Santa Cruz, and about the death of Mendaña. It was a story of failure, but a heroic failure in their struggle for life. The sick were taken to city hospitals and monasteries, where monks and doctors tried to save those who could still be saved. However, for many, help came too late. People were already dying on solid ground, their bodies simply unable to withstand the sudden change in conditions. The mortality rate remained high even after their arrival. The fate of the other ships in the squadron varied. Some disappeared without a trace, sinking into the ocean with all their people. Another ship, as it turned out later, reached Mindanao in terrible condition. The expedition, which began as a great migration, ended in complete disaster. Investigations and trials began in Manila. Isabel Barredo tried to defend her rights and property, blaming everyone around her for the failures. Quiros wrote detailed reports to the king, analyzing mistakes and insisting on the need for new expeditions, but with a different approach. Pedro Fernandez de Quiros was no ordinary mercenary or adventurer. He was a visionary, a man of deep faith and learning, for whom the Mendaña expedition was only the beginning of the journey. Having survived the horrors of Santa Cruz and the death voyage to Manila, he did not break down or give up on the sea. On the contrary, what he saw convinced him that there was a huge southern continent in the Pacific Ocean, Terra Australis Incognita. Unlike Mendaña, who was looking for gold, Quezada dreamed of saving souls and opening up new lands for Christianity. He believed that the failure of the expedition was punishment for the sins, cruelty, and greed of its participants. Quezada believed that a new expedition should be based on the principles of mercy and peace with the local inhabitants. Returning to Peru and then traveling to Spain and Rome, he launched a vigorous campaign. He wrote memoranda to the king and the pope, arguing for the need for a new expedition. His obsession was no less intense than that of Mendaña, but it had a different focus, spiritual and exploratory. Cordoba became one of the best navigators of his time. He perfected methods of determining latitude and created new maps of the Pacific Ocean. His experience of surviving on the ship of death taught him to value every drop of water and every piece of bread. He developed instructions on hygiene and diet for future voyages. As a result, he managed to obtain permission for a new expedition in 1605. He set sail again, trying to find the southern continent. He discovered many islands, including Vanuatu, which he took to be part of the continent and named Australia del Espiritu Santo. However, his idealism was confronted with the same harsh reality. His crew wanted riches, not the salvation of souls. History began to repeat itself. Disease, discontent, the threat of mutiny. Quiros, a brilliant theorist and navigator, proved to be a weak commander, unable to keep the rough sailors in check. The most surprising consequence of Magellan's expedition was that the Solomon Islands disappeared. Although Magellan discovered them in 1568 and then tried to find them again in 1595, the coordinates of the archipelago were so inaccurately determined that cartographers became confused. An error in determining the longitude led to the islands floating across the maps of the Pacific Ocean, shifting thousands of miles. Sailors and explorers of subsequent centuries tried in vain to find the land of Ophir that Mendaña had spoken of. The islands became a cartographic myth, a legend similar to Atlantis. Some even began to doubt whether they really existed or were the product of the Spaniards' fevered imagination. This disappearance saved the inhabitants of the Solomon Islands from European invasion for a whole 200 years. While Europeans drew lines on paper and argued in academies, the islanders lived their lives, unaware of the existence of gunpowder and the cross. Mendaña's curse became a blessing for them, delaying colonization. It was not until the end of the 18th century that French and English explorers such as Bougainville and Carteret stumbled upon these lands again. They gave the islands new names, unaware that these were the very golden islands of the Spaniards. The identification came much later when scientists compared descriptions of coastlines and local customs. The mystery of Mendana's navigation stumped historians for a long time. How could an entire archipelago be lost? The answer lies in the imperfection of 16th century instruments and the complexity of Pacific Ocean currents. The ocean is vast, and without an accurate chronometer, it was almost impossible to find a piece of land again. The history of the search for the Solomon Islands is the history of the development of navigation. From intuitive guesses and primitive astrolabes to accurate chronometers and sextants. Each unsuccessful attempt to find them added a grain of knowledge to the treasure trove of geography. The very idea of the Golden Islands turned out to be a myth. No gold was found on the Solomon Islands, but rather complex cultures, warlike tribes, and rich nature. Gold was only in the name, invented to lure money from the King of Spain.
Approve the voyage, Viceroy, to the glorious Spain. Paradise of untold riches.
The story of Álvaro de Mendaña in his 1595 expedition is not just an episode from a history textbook. It is a grand drama about human ambition colliding with the insurmountable force of nature. It is a story about how a dream can become a prison and paradise can become hell. We saw how technical unpreparedness and blind faith lead to disaster. The Spaniards tried to transplant their world into the jungle, unwilling to adapt to local conditions. Their pride prevented them from learning from those who had lived on these islands for centuries. It was a lesson that Europeans would continue to learn for centuries, repeating the same mistakes. The role of personality in this story is enormous. Mendana's fanaticism set this mechanism in motion, Quiros' professionalism prevented it from falling apart completely, and Isabel Barreto's cruelty brought it to its conclusion. Each of them played their part in this tragedy, revealing different facets of human character in an extreme situation. This expedition also showed the fragility of human civilization. As soon as the usual conditions of comfort and safety were removed, people descended into barbarism. The cultural layer turned out to be as thin as an eggshell, easily broken by the blows of fate. But at the same time, this is a story of incredible survival. People went through hell, lost everything, but managed to return. The ability of a person to endure hardship and move forward against all odds commands respect, even if the goals of this movement were false. We saw how a great dream turned into a great tragedy, and what price had to be paid for one man's ambitions. The survival of the Mendana expedition is a miracle created on the edge of possibility. What price of victory do you think is acceptable? Write in the comments what other forgotten expeditions or maritime mysteries you would like to learn about in future videos. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click on the bell. There are still many unexplored shores ahead of us. See you soon.